Hello and welcome to Dialogue. This year marks the 10-year milestone of the Belt and Road Initiative. Over the past decade, the BRI has transformed the global economic landscape of the global South countries, including Sri Lanka. At this year's Beijing Xiangshan Forum, I'm honored to speak with Piyal De Silva, former commander of the Sri Lankan Navy, to share his views on how the BRI has impacted Sri Lanka in the past decade. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Okay, Mr. De Silva, welcome to Dialogue, and everybody, you're welcome to join the discussion. So we'll start with, Xiangshan Forum, which is really about security, regional security, international security. But at the same time, we understand security is closely related to development. And speak of development, this year marks the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative. And your country, Sri Lanka, is an important part of Belt and Road Initiative. I wonder, when you look back over the past 10 years, how do you review, how do you comment on the performance of Sri Lanka in participating in the Belt and Road Initiative?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this interview. And let me first speak a little bit about this Xiangshan Forum from my perspective. This forum is one of the leading forums in the world, and I'm so surprised to see such a large number gathered here for this forum this year. And this forum will certainly facilitate to discuss about the global security issues concerning matters, and also allow the participant to express their views, thoughts and opinion to take a better decision and to come to consensus and take better decisions for the benefit of the global security and stability. So that's my opinion about this forum.
Yes, stability, peace and security, as we said, it has a lot to do with development. Without development, there would be a lot of problems, a lot of challenges for any nation, any country there. So if you focus a little bit on Sri Lanka, let's say, what about the achievements or the challenges during the past years in participating in the Belt and Road Initiative?
So the Belt and Road Initiative of China, launched in 2013, is a holistic concept aimed at trans-regional connectivity for development of China as well as partner countries. I believe that it is based on China's famous philosophy of harmonious win-win. Right? It gives the participating countries an opportunity to explore the possibility for economic development. And this is a project, according to understanding, spending billions of US dollars, and it's a mega project reflecting the ancient Chinese Silk Road that connected Asia, Africa, the Middle East and Europe for trade and cultural exchanges as well as diplomacy changes. So I believe that this is a very good opportunity for the partner countries to exploit and make use of these opportunities to prosper the country.
Speak of the ancient Silk Road, Sri Lanka and the Chinese people, there were, let's say, changes or exchanges, let's say thousands of years ago.
Of course, as long as the Silk Road is concerned, we have a very good relationship with China. According to the history, and the Chinese travelers have visited Sri Lanka from the 3rd century BC. I think it's 399, a famous Buddhist monk, Fahian, had come to Sri Lanka using the Silk Road to India, and from there crossing the Indian Ocean by boat. Then again, according to the history, it says that Marco Polo came to Sri Lanka in 1289 as an agent of Emperor Kublai Khan of Mongolia for another exploration. Then the famous Admiral Cheng He visited Sri Lanka a number of times, starting from 1412 to 1433, and he has visited 6 times for the purpose of trade, cultural exchange and diplomacy. So he has been a frequent visitor to Sri Lanka, and while exploring the Indian Ocean, he visited Sri Lanka a number of times. So that kind of history we have in terms of Silk Road that was existed for more than 2,000 years.
Yeah, more than 2,000 years. Of course, recent years, in particular the past 10 years, during this Belt and Road Initiative, we know that, the initiative started with infrastructure construction, roads, highways, ports, for example. And what about your country's construction of those infrastructure projects?
Yeah, this Road and Belt Initiative is fundamentally based on 4 areas, that is infrastructure development, economic development, social development and policy reform. So Sri Lanka has involved in all 4 areas. As far as the infrastructure development is concerned, we have very fruitful, very productive infrastructure development program, especially related to highways and railways. Now today we can go to Hambantota using the superhighway that China has invested and constructed within 3 hours. But those days it used to take more than 6 hours. I remember going to Hambantota before the establishment of this road, taking 7 to 8 hours and staying overnight without coming back on the same day. Now the situation is completely different. We can go to Hambantota and return on the same day. It takes only the full passage will take only 6 to 7 hours.
6 to 7 hours.
And we have to understand one important aspect which has never been highlighted, I believe. It is the emission of carbon. Now today the trend is the reduction of carbon emission to the atmosphere. Now just imagine the number of vehicles going to Hambantota and coming back using the old road. It takes about 14 hours for go there and return. Now it takes only 7 hours. So that means 100% reduction in carbon emission to the environment. So this is a very good achievement and it's good contribution for the environment protection and upkeep.
Speak of course, the security issue, Sri Lanka being there in the Indian Ocean, there's, for example, there's a concern, there's competition. We know that there's a big power competition, regional countries, US, not the US, but US, they talk about Indo-Pacific, this concept. And you have India, you have China, people are focusing on or turning their attention to the security in the Indian Ocean. There's an incident, I would say, there's a surveying ship from China once was docking or not docked, with the Hambantota port. What really happened there?
Yeah, though the power competition is there in the Indian Ocean region, Sri Lanka maintains a very neutral position with all the powerful countries. Our foreign policy is such that friendly with everyone. We don't have enemies. So, enemy of none and friend of all. So that's that kind of policy we are following. Therefore, we maintain a balance with every country that is interested in the Indo-Pacific region. So with regard to this particular ship, I think it is Xi'an 6 that was to come to Sri Lanka. I think it came, it docked in Sri Lanka very recently. When I left for Sri Lanka, the vessel was there. I don't know whether it has left or not. So my opinion is that it is a survey vessel. I, being a diver, I explore sea, and whenever I find new information, I disseminate the information to others. So that's part of my philosophy and my work. So when the ships are built, they should not be kept in harbors or at anchorage. The ships should sail. Especially when a survey vessel is made, I believe that it should engage in its desired purpose of surveying and disseminate the information for the betterment of the humankind. Right? So the ocean covers about 70% of the Earth's surface. To date, only 5% of the ocean has been explored. Right? Only a very limited countries have the capacity to engage in ocean surveying, and as long as the vessels engage in lawful activity with the participation of the countries that they are visiting or interested, and share the information for the benefit of the humankind, I think the vessel should be allowed to engage in surveying and docking. And especially when the harbors are built, harbors should attract ships to revenue to generate their revenue. So if there is an opportunity to get a vessel to a harbor, as long as it engage in innocent passage and lawful activity, so the harbor should be open for the vessel. That's my personal opinion.
Belt and Road Initiative is about development. We know it's one of the biggest development projects around the world. But the thing is, like, for a lot of developing countries, for the global south, the focus, the priority is about cooperation, working together to build projects for the development of the nation, for the livelihood of the people. But then, if you look at the views from some of the countries about the BRI, they view it as a geopolitical move of China. Your country has been with participating in the BRI for 10 years. Do you see there's any strategic motivation or geopolitical consideration?
It's the opinion of others, but my opinion is that so far the Sri Lankan community have yielded the benefits of the infrastructure development that China has done to Sri Lanka, especially the road network. As I mentioned before, it's not only the road that leads from Colombo to Hambantota. There are connected roads, so the entire road network is now completed, so people can reach the places within the shortest possible time. So this has given benefits to many sectors like education, transport, health, then the agriculture. Now any product that is made in Hambantota can be brought to Colombo within the shortest possible time, not like those days. So that way the agri products are also saved to some extent, right? It won't get spoiled. So the fishery sector, so almost every sector is benefited through these infrastructure development, and more importantly, job opportunities have created.
Well, thank you, Mr. De Silva. Thank you for joining us for this dialogue. With conflicts around the world, such as the ongoing Ukraine crisis and now that between Israel and Palestine, the topic of global security has never been more relevant in our time. What do these two conflicts tell us about the current state of global security? What international platforms are available to resolve such conflicts? And how could China's global security initiative play a role in promoting peace and stability? To help us answer these questions, I'm glad to have the exclusive interview with David Harland, Executive Director of the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue in Switzerland. Welcome to Dialogue, Mr. Harland. So let's start with the latest one, probably the conflict in the Middle East. So any response from you and your organization, what's the best way forward right now?
I think the Israel-Palestine conflict is very difficult, and I think there are people looking at China. The United States has been traditionally involved for a long time, but as you know, it's not seen as neutral. It's not seen as even-handed. So I think China, which has a different approach to negotiations, a different approach to dialogue, and of course China has a long tradition of non-interference in the internal affairs of states. I think that at this particular moment where the world is so violently polarized and so fragmented, that China could play a positive role in the Israel-Palestine, but also in a number of other contexts.
Mm-hmm. Are you saying that, Harland, during this time of fragmentation and division globally, probably we need more dialogue, we need more negotiation, need to more like face-to-face talks with each other to address the differences or the challenges there?
Absolutely. I think that the advantage of dialogue is that at least you don't sleepwalk into conflict. There is a famous metaphor that World War I began because of a sleepwalking, that the great powers weren't listening to each other. And I think actually the fragmentation among great powers, the lack of dialogue, and also the fragmentation among populations has never been greater. So I think there is a sort of 1914 risk at the moment, a risk that we don't communicate clearly. And it doesn't necessarily mean about being on friendly terms, back channels that simply allow for a clear statement of where red lines are. The habits of good dialogue, negotiation, back channels, these have been eroded over the last decades, and we need them now more than ever.
Does that kind of, let's say, lack of quiet diplomacy play a role, let's say, in the existing conflicts like the Ukraine crisis, like the Gaza-Israel crisis here?
Well, I think the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, if it had taken place during the Cold War, I think if there had been a dispute between the great powers about the status of a country near to one or other of them, I think that probably there could have been better efforts to try and prevent it. Yes, I think there is a problem at the moment in the diplomatic system, and I think the lack of dialogue is increasing the risk of warfare in a number of contexts.
Speak of the Russian-Ukraine crisis, we know that, and let's be frank, the West, the US and Europeans would love to see the rest of the world to join them, to side with them against Russia in this conflict, but that's not happening. And we do see this global South, including major countries like China, like India, they tend to take a neutral stance on that issue. Is that a surprise for a lot of people, in particular for people from the West?
Yeah, I think it's been a big reminder that the international system is changing very fast, and that we're not living in a system of two camps anymore. We're living in a very multipolar system in which countries have a whole range of options for pursuing their interests. And I think with respect to the Ukraine crisis, the war in Ukraine, a lot of countries have seen it as very far away and more of Europe's problems, and they have to look after their own needs. So I think you're absolutely right. A lot of the Western countries have felt it as a big disappointment, but I don't think it's a unique case. I suspect that one may see similar on Israel-Palestine and in future conflicts. I think the bipolar world has gone and the multipolar world is here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, multipolar world is here, and what does that mean to to this global security situation? Are we seeing more conflicts, or are we seeing more challenges probably to address these conflicts?
We are seeing more conflict. I think we've had the very large war in Ukraine, And that's in fact the largest interstate war since World War II, probably. And we also had a very large war in Ethiopia. You know, actually, the estimates vary, but between 300,000 and 600,000 people killed. You know, just a colossal conflict. And now, of course, we have Israel-Palestine, where already about 10,000 people, mostly innocent civilians, have been killed. There is the possibility that conflict could escalate dramatically, I think, if things develop in a certain way in Gaza. It's very possible that Hezbollah and therefore Lebanon will be drawn in, and therefore the risk of a wider conflict is greater. And while those risks are elevated, the dialogue, that is the diplomacy and the back channels and the negotiation and the mediation, which could normally mitigate those risks, that dialogue is largely absent. So we have growing risks and, you know, shrinking capacity to manage those risks.
To manage those differences, and also, you know, probably another challenge would be this. You do see increasing number of countries engage their diplomacy or relationship with other countries, you know, based on like ideological differences or based on values, you know, whether to deal with or not to deal with another country, and or sometimes people see a particular issue in black and white manner. We know, despite, you know, many of the issues are very complicated, including the Ukraine crisis, including this Gaza-Israel crisis here. So you think that's also adds probably to the problem, to the challenges?
I think it's particularly a problem for the West. The issue of a heavily values-driven foreign policy and security policy is particularly predominant in the West. I mean, you are Chinese, so you will tell me, but I don't see, as I look at Chinese history, a strong motivation to insist that other people should be more like themselves, you know. Whereas, you know, I think non-interference in the internal affairs of other states comes relatively naturally from a very long Chinese history of dealing with the world. Whereas I think the West, for different historical reasons, partly to do with a tradition of imperialism, partly to do with a tradition of Christian missionaryism, has tended, particularly for the last 200 years, to engage with the world in terms of how can the world be more like us. And you know, there have certainly been some positive aspects to that, but there have been many negative aspects to that. And I think that at a time when, you know, the world is very polarized in its value systems and in many other ways and very fragmented, it's simply not a viable approach because there aren't enough shared values, and at least at this point in history they don't have the capacity to impose that. So I think, for example, China's tradition, which is, you know, much more inclined to accept countries' internal systems as they are, is probably the reason, for example, that you saw, you know, Iran and Saudi Arabia looking to China as a possible mediator.
Mm-hmm. We do see in recent years, you know, the Chinese side put forward this global security initiative, global civilization initiative, along with this development initiative. Of course, the stress is still about development. But do you see there's an increasing, let's say, a rather active tendency, you know, from the Chinese side, you know, diplomatically to get involved in or to help resolve those conflicts? Either it's about the Ukraine situation or about the current Israel-Gaza situation there?
My feeling is, first of all, it's very positive that China has laid out the basic principles for its engagement with the world's security issues through its Global Security Initiative. The principles are very positive, and I think, you know, they will be elaborated and the practice of those principles will become clear over the years, but I think it's very, very, very good they've done that. And I think, frankly, many countries in the world, they look at China somehow they see behind those principles also a country that, for better and for worse, has a very strong tradition of non-interference in internal affairs, and is a country which has not traditionally sought to project power to the far abroad through military means. So I think at a time when the risk of armed conflict is really very high, I think that China will be sought as a partner, and I think the principles of the Global Security Initiative are a good framework.
In your opinion, what kind of role China could play, looking into the future to help resolve the disputes, resolve the conflicts in the European continent?
Well, I hope that China sees the positive role it played with the grain deals between Ukraine and Russia, which was well received by Ukraine and by Russia, but also by so many countries around the world, which rely on grain from Russia and Ukraine. So I hope that China sees that it is able to play a positive role, and from the war itself, and in particular the post-war period, is going to be extremely dangerous because the underlying factors which drove the conflict are still going to be there. So I think China has a role to play immediately. The grain deal has for the moment broken down, and China has been promoting stability, and I think that China could very usefully and productively follow up its positive intervention on the Black Sea by simply reminding the parties that hundreds of millions of people around the world need the grain from Russia and Ukraine, and that the parties should be strictly following international law in not interfering with the commercial track of the other side. Because, as you say, China has tended to stress in its own diplomacy economic links over military links. It has also stressed the framework of international law. And I think international maritime law requires that international shipping not be attacked. So I think, China clearly, like everybody else, has its interests and its friends. But I think even within that, there's a lot of positive that China can do, from right now on stabilizing the situation on the Black Sea, where China's done tremendous work already, right through to the post-war arrangements, where, as you know, the whole arms control framework has collapsed and so on. So there'll be a lot of work, and I think China's engagement would, it wouldn't be plain sailing every day for everybody, but I think ultimately it would be very, very positive.
Well, on that note, we conclude today's discussion. Thank you, Mr. Harland.
Thank you, Mr. Xu. A great pleasure. Great. Very good.